Hello, and welcome back to our series where we are building this people and culture management system. The series is brought to you by Prairie HR Solutions. My name is Jake Finger, principal consultant and founder here at Prairie HR Solutions. And this is part two of a sub-series that we are putting together to enhance functionality on our compensation. To get you caught up, our part one was we received a question that turned into a suggestion of creating a compensation salary predictor or projector to where an employee, or not an employee, excuse me, a user can input a candidate's experience and then calculate what the proposed salary would be based on our data. And if you come back here, you'll remember if you watched that video, we were ended that video with a to-do item, and that was to figure out why in the world this isn't centering. And looking at it now, I know exactly why. It's because it is centering. It's just this X is taking up space. So it's not using this and this as its boundaries. It's using this X. And we've also used text center in our CSS for our, I believe it was our benefits graph, our benefits chart here. So let's just do it a different way. Let's come over here. Let's take care of that real quick. Let's come over here to our code and find that text center piece on that modal. Okay, it's right here. New salary analysis. Here's our modal. So we're not going to use text center because we kind of changed that. We played with that a little bit for our CSS. So instead of creating a new class, we'll just use something else that Bootstrap uses. And what Bootstrap does is it allows you, we've used this, it allows you to set margins. So this is margin top right here, and it has 3 and margin bottom. But you can also set left and right. So if you do margin X, that is both left and right, and we can set that to auto. So to show you what I'm going to do here is I'm going to just come down here to this salary analysis proposal and set this class property to MX auto. And I want to save this, and we'll go back and look and see what that does. And you may be able to pick it up. We'll see if you can pick it up or not, but it is going to shift slightly, but it's not going to be centered. You can see it's shifted slightly over, not going to be centered because of this little X right here. So the end of this X is probably right here, maybe this div. So it's still finding the center of it. It's just to the end of this X. Now I know the X is a staple for closing internet boxes. Here though, we do have a closed box. So I'm just going to get rid of that X so we can just get it done. So let's come back over here and let's find that button. We don't need more than one way to close a button. So let's save this and then we'll go back and refresh it to make sure we pick up that code, and there we go. Now when we look at it, now it's centered. Okay, good. So in order for this to work, what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to get the experience and all the salaries and essentially find where the slope intersects, where that X and Y meet to give ourselves a salary projection. So let's look at facilities managers. We'll just pick this one up. So say that we've had, out of our 8 employees, we are wanting to find a best salary to offer somebody with, say, 9 years of experience. So right here. Well, you could just simply go up here and grab it. Or what you could do is, because we have the salary, we have all the experience, and we're actually finding the slope and the intercept here with our linear regression, we can simply just calculate that in that box. And that's what we're going to do. Now, remember though, this line of best fit, this linear regression calculation that we've done is going to change depending on this data. So if we change any piece of this data, add, subtract, or adjust any of these, the linear regression is going to change and the trend line is going to change. So just keep that in mind, that this should not be down to the cent, but we should be able to look at it and say, okay, so a good fit would be roughly around this area here. So let's kind of think this through here a little bit. We already have our linear regression. I'm going to build a new function. Now, granted, if I was doing this, if it was just me and I was coding like crazy to do this, I would use that linear regression helper function that we already have. But understanding that perhaps people have just jumped in to this specific episode for their benefit, I'm going to go ahead and do another function. And I'm going to do that function a slightly different way than we did the other, just so you have both ways of doing it. You can have two different functions to do the same exact thing. One may make more sense in your situation or to you, and you just like using it that way. But that way you'll have two different examples. And the other thing that we're going to do, you'll notice that I removed this default position. We need to populate that with whatever our job title is. So I just went ahead and removed that. I yanked it. It was right here. So if we were to put, this used to have default, I just removed it real quick because we don't need anything in there. I suppose we could leave it there, but we could leave it there, I guess. But eventually our idea is to populate this with whatever job title is in that job title box. So let's go ahead and jump into this. Now, I want to warn you, this isn't going to be a tutorial on how to run a linear regression analysis on data. So I'm not going to go that deep into statistics. And if you really want to look at the formula and how it works and what it is that we're doing, I suggest you go back and look at that previous episode because we go pretty much in depth there. But I just want to get through the function and give that other example of a function so we can get it to work. If you truly want to know how to do that linear regression, or would you like us to make a different video on how to find that, please let me know. Our email is in the description box, and we'll be happy to put something together if that is of interest. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to need to do is we are going to need to figure out when we want to run this. So we obviously want to run this when we press calculate. So we want to put a number in here and press calculate and then have it spit out what it thinks the proposed salary is based on that linear regression. Now we want to ensure that the salary and the experience is already populated ahead of time. So we can populate that data stored in a variable and just have it sitting there in case we want to do this or not. And it wouldn't matter. It's just a very simple, won't take any performance because we already have the data. We just want to assign it someplace different. And that's what we need to figure out when that actually occurs. So all of our data is populated and then it goes into this chart and down here with all the calculations. So what we could do is look at our code here. And since we're going to create a new function, we don't want to mess with pushing or any new data to these arrays that are populating this. But what we can do, since we're using a new function, is just create another variable specifically for use of that function and have it push to that. So let me show you what I mean here. So let's come up here to our head because that's where everything is happening. And it's happening up here. So what we could do is we want all functions to be able to grab the two variables that we're going to have. So we already have our chart data, our chart options based, and all data. So let's just create two new variables. And let's call the first one salaries, and you can call this whatever. And that's simply going to be an empty variable because we're going to fill that with data every time we filter. And let's just call the next one sal experience. Okay, so now we have that, and you can fill in the comments here if you want. So now let's figure out the best place to push that. So we know we have the salaries and the experience here, but we don't want to just pull this right off the bat. We want it to go through its for each in the all data, and then we want to push that data to those empty arrays. And then after this, after it pushes this, then we can add in those variables. So let's create a variable here. Let's say no, we don't need to create a variable because the variable is already there. What we just need to do is assign it a value. So after this runs and it's all pushed and this array is complete and filled, then we want to set a variable, and that variable we have already declared up top, and it's this, but we want to make that equal to salaries. And then we want to do the same thing to salary experience is going to be equal to experience. Okay, so good. That takes care of that. So now while we're here, let's look at what we have here. So we have this job title, and that's pulling the value of that drop-down box in the comp jobs. And then we're setting the comp market job and all that. So this would be a perfect place to just add in the text content. And the reason why I say the text content, it would be a good place to just add here because we're already grabbing it. We're already doing something with it. So we can just grab whatever this ID is and then populate it. Now it's not going to be a value. And let me show you what I mean here. It's not going to be a value or inner HTML because it's not inner HTML. It's not going to be a value. What we're trying to do is we are trying to set this text content, which is exactly what we're going to use, of this little ID span here. So we don't want HTML. It's not going to be HTML. It's not going to be a value because it has no value, but it does have text and text content. So instead of value, we will use text content. So let me scroll back up here. And it's right here. So we got to declare the job title, and we can just use that. And then let's do it right after our market job title, market job filter value. Let's just put it right down. Well, let's put it right down here. That'll be fine. After it gets done running all this thing, we want to tell it, oh yeah, by the way, also throw the job title in this. So this will be document.get element by ID, and the ID is that job span that we were just looking at. And it's not going to be a value. It's going to be text content. And that text content is going to be equal to the job title. Okay, so that takes care of that. So if we save this, I'm going to show you exactly what that does. Let's use value first. I know value just isn't, to me, I get it confused because it just makes sense. So let's do value, and I'll show you that nothing populates. And it just doesn't change it. Hopefully it doesn't make a liar out of me, but we'll see. So let's change this to facilities manager. Now it's run through it. It's done all its calculations. So it should be running into this, but you can see it's not changing the value of it because it's not a value. It's text content. So if we were to come back here and change this value, where'd it go? Right here, to text content. And the reason I'm going through this is simply because if you're running into something like this and you're like, why isn't it populating? It's probably because value, inner HTML, inner text, and text content. So we're wanting to set the text content of it. And then we'll come back here, refresh, and you'll see that it populates. At least it better. Be awkward if it doesn't, but nah, it will. And there you go, all jobs. And then we can come up here and, okay, we changed it to facility manager. Once facility manager runs, then we open it up. There it is, facility manager. So good. Okay, so that takes care of that. So now let's come back here. We have these variables that we're going to need. Now let's go ahead and give our button something to call. So let's come down here to our button, and we want to trigger this. Here's our calculate button. When this is pressed or clicked, we want it to run a function, and let's just say on click, we'll call that function project salary. Yeah, that'll work. So now we just need to create this function here. So scroll up here, find a good place for that function. We want that function to be nestled, because remember, we want our code to read as much like a book as possible, and we want it to still be in here. And you'll see that we have a function to display the regression values, the slope, intercept, and squared. So you could, if you feel comfortable and okay with how we did this and how you found the linear regression, you could just modify this, or the functions down here, these helper functions that we have. This one right here is actually what I was looking for. And you can just modify this to have it return the slope and the intercept and do that, because that's really what we need is to calculate this is our slope and our intercept. But instead, I'm actually not going to do it this way. It will look similar, xi, yi, y mean, but I want to redo this from scratch, because I know if you're looking at this the first time, it's a lot to wrap your head around. And I want to show you a different way than just doing this for loop with numerator and denominator. So let's jump up here and back to our page. Back to our page. And let's just put it right here after our map. And before we display those other regression values, let's just run this thing, or let's just have it nestled here. So when that button's pushed, it'll run it. Okay, so let's say function, and it was project salary, I believe. Yep, there it is. Okay, so what we're going to need is essentially our X data and our Y data. We need that horizontal data and the vertical data. The X data is experience. The vertical data is, or that Y data is salary. So salary by experience. So let's just create some variables here. Let's say let X data equals sal experience. That's obviously going to be the experience. I think it was a sal experience. Let's see. Sal experience. Yep. Because that's the X. And then we can do let Y data equal sal salaries. Probably could have thought of some better variable names for that, but it is what it is. Sorry about that. And now we're going to calculate. No, we're not going to calculate. No, I guess we can use calculate. Calculate linear regression. Again, this is not going to be a tutorial on how or what this formula is, all that. But I'll try to kind of go over the most important thing. So I'll put the formula in here. So we have y equals mx plus b. So y equals the slope of x plus the intercept. That's kind of what that pretty much is saying. Now, in order to find the linear regression, we need to do some stuff. What we need to do is, if you're really interested on the formula, what we're going to be doing is creating the values in the formula, storing them in a variable, and then plotting out that formula inside our code to run. If you're really curious about how to find the m and the b, the sum of the squares and the sum of the products, then you'll be able to just jump in and, you can kind of Google, do an internet search for that, or you can just shoot us an email. We'll be happy to work you through it. So this is the formula. So what we're going to need is the length of our experience data. And what we can do is just create a variable, call that in. That is the typical mathematical variable for length, or how many numbers you have in something. So we'll just say it's in. And that is going to be equal to xdata.length. Okay, so that takes care of that. So now what we need to do is we need to find all the sums of x. And if you watched a previous video, we have a helper function that does just that. So let's find, yep, here we go. Calculate sum, reduce total current. So we can call this whatever, AB, starting point at 0. So what we're going to do is we're essentially going to do this both for the x data and the y data. And reduce method takes an array of values and essentially reduces it down to one number with a starting point. So we're going to do just this. And if you are curious about how we got this, again, it's in our previous video. So what we can do is let's create a variable called sum x, I guess that'll work. And that's going to be equal to our x data, all this experience, and we want to reduce that as a per b. And what we want to run, or the function we want to call is a plus b starting at 0. And then we want to do the same exact thing with the y data. So we can just copy this, regurgitate it, we'll change this to y, and this will be y, and everything else should be the same. Good, so now we have the sum of x's and the sum of y's. So now it's going to get a little interesting. I'm going to try to figure out how it is that I'm going to go through this, and I'll try to explain it. And I hope I can explain it in a easy to understand way. So the first thing that we're going to need to do is find the sum of the products, and we can call that sum of x, y. So what we're going to need to do here is we're going to need to use a map with an embedded reduce. So we need to map the x for every value in that array times the y for every one of those values, and then reduce that down to a single number. So what that's going to look like, let's create a variable, and we'll just say sum xy. I know we joined HR, so we didn't have to worry about x and y's and a's and b's, but there it is. Here we go. So we need to take the x data, and we need to map that first. And what we're going to map is xi. And if you remember, we were starting to do this right here in a for loop. Instead of a for loop, we're simply just going to do the map. And that way we're not having to do this math power mean thingy. So we're mapping the xi for every I, and then we'll use our arrow function. And what we're going to do is multiply that by the y data at I, and then we can reduce that essentially this same way. Right here. And what this is this is going to be the sum of the products for x data and y data values. All right, so now let's do the products. Now that we have the sum of the products, let's do the sum of the squares is what I was meaning to say. Of those the X data values, those experiences. So this variable we can call X, I guess. Yeah, we'll just call it XX. Now this is going to be X data, and we're going to map this as well. And this time we are going to take XI, and for every XI, we are going to times it by itself. So if this is 2, then we're going to times it by 2. If it's 4, we're going to times it by 4. So to do that, we can simply put XI times XI, and then we can reduce that down by its sum. So we can copy this again. And then that will give us sum of the squares of X data. Okay, good. So now we need to find the slope and we need to find the intercept. So you can see down here, over here, that our slope is the numerator and the denominator. So the numerator and the denominator is what we're going to need to focus on. And then the intercept is, the sum of the y minus that slope. Yes, this is y mean, but essentially that's what we just found was the mean by reducing it. You can either do this the long way by finding the mean this way, or you can just use reduce, which does kind of the same exact thing. And then we want to subtract the slope from that and then multiply by x mean, or what we called the sum of x, that would be reduced down to the mean. Okay, so maybe this probably wasn't the best word to use. This really isn't necessarily the sum because it's also the average. But we'll just leave it for now. That's fine. And let's create a variable, call it slope, not sloper, slope. And this slope is going to be equal to n times. Now, the reason why we're using n is because we're taking it through a different path. So we still have to find the average. I know I'm probably confusing you. We have the sum of everything right now. We do need to find the average by dividing it by the number, and that's where this n comes in. So a way that we can do that is we can take that number, sum xy, minus sum of, what would it be, x, and then multiply that by some y, and then we divide that. So this is actually the numerator in our code here. Now we need to do the same exact thing and find the denominator, which will be its own parentheses, and that's going to be n times sum xx minus sum x, is the sum of all of our x data. And then we want to multiply that by some x. And this finds the slope. Now you can see that writing this code and doing these calculations is pretty much rife for errors. So what I prefer to do is I write it and think, okay, so I think I got it. And then I just test it and use console logs if I need to figure out where things are failing or not making sense. But you never know. You can get lucky and it just works straight off the bat as intended. But that never happens to me. So we'll see. We'll see how it goes. So now our intercept, let's come back over here. Our intercept is our y mean minus slope and times our x mean. So we can actually break this down instead of having to find the y mean separately and the x mean separately. What we can do is do the sum of y minus the slope times the sum of x, and then divide that by the n. Because if you think about it, n is the same for both our sum x and our sum y. They have the same length. And this is going to be finds the intercept. Okay, so now we have that. So we have our regression, our linear regression anyway. So now we can calculate the estimated salary based on experience. In keeping with kind of what we were doing, we probably want to check to make sure the data that's coming to us is actually data that we can use. So we'll have to build that in there. Let's first call a variable, and let's just call this variable sal experience, because we need to store whatever value the user is inputting into that drop-down box into a variable. And this variable, so this variable is already formatted as a number, and it has validation. It can't go below 0. And we can't type this in here. But if you're not using numbers, and this is just a straight input box, let's ensure that this is set up to be a number. And we could use the number, we could use this, but instead what we're going to use is parse float. And we used parse float before. And what parse float does is it turns it into a number, but it also allows decimal places. And what we're going to parse float, let me make sure that this, okay, now we're sharing it. My apologies. Looks like it didn't transfer over quite yet on the view, but here we are. So I'm using parse float instead of number. Now, some places we were using number and we used parse float before. I'm going to use parse float in here because we want it to have decimals. We don't want it to be solely whole numbers. And what we're going to float, as I like to call it, what we're going to parse float is whatever value is in that element. So we got to get that element by ID, and that element by ID is going to be, I'm not even going to take a guess because I forgot it. My apologies. It's going to be this salary analysis experience. Okay, so let's come up here, salary analysis exp, and we want to get the value of that. And then once we get the value of that, we'll set it to a number using parse float. Now we can check if that number is actually valid. Now, granted, our input box is set to only take a number. It's formatted and validated to take only numbers in between certain numbers, but let's just write this in as a fail-safe just in case. Or if you decide to use a text input box, maybe you forgot to change it to numbers or whatnot, we're just going to write this in here. So if we need to check if sal experience is not a number, so if is nan, and this is nan, we want to check experience. So if this experience is not a number, or when we think about it logically, sal experience is a negative number, which would be less than 0, then we want to do something. What we want to do is we just want to throw out a console. Maybe we can put that in, no, not that. We can put that in our box, get element by ID. And that one was salary analysis prop. We can just put it right there, and I just seen an error right here, so that's not good. And we can just set the value of that. the value of that input box. We can use value here because it's an input box and it's wanting to take a value. And we can just put in, please enter a valid number. Okay, and then we just return nothing. So if that's what happens if this is true. Now, if it's false, we just want to run something else. We can just put that down here. And what we want it to run is our estimated salary. So we need to find that salary and put it in a variable. And we can call that variable estimated salary. And what that salary is going to be is the slope times the experience plus our intercept. So that's the formula that we're going to use. So what I'll do is I'll come up here and calculate projected salary. And it's going to be our slope times experience. And this is going to be plus intercept. So before you think that I am just a math guru, you're like, wow, you just created a formula. I really didn't. So I did not create this. This is this right here. So we have X. X is our experience. I know I probably should have just kept my mouth shut and y'all would have thought I was a genius, but I'm simply just putting this in here. That is our Y right there, our salary. We have our X, that is our experience. The slope is M, which we have here, and B is the intercept, which we have there. So multiplying this together and then adding that. So that's all I did. So what we need to do to make that happen is we need to take our slope variable, which we have above. We need to multiply that by our sal experience. And then once we get this product, then we add it to B, or our intercepts. There we go. So now we can, well, now that we have this, let's just populate it onto our piece here. So let's grab that document dot get element by ID. That element by ID is going to be salary analysis experience. No, it's not. It's not this one. It is that one. The proposed salary. And since that's an input, it's going to want a value, and that value is going to be whatever this estimated salary is. Now, this number is not going to come over the way that we want because it's not formatted how we want. So remember, if you watched our previous videos, we created a helper function to format our numbers to where they're more the way the US looks at things. And it's actually this, and this time we're using number, which is fine. And we're going to need to do the same exact thing here. Because if we were to just leave it like this, it's going to end up as a number with no commas, no decimals, and it's just going to look a little bit weird. So let's just go ahead and format it. Now, if you have that helper function, if you were following along and have that helper function, you could just send that over. But again, we're just doing this from scratch for those that weren't there, and jump to it. Okay, so we have our minimum fraction digit is 2, maximum fraction digit is 2. So that means that anything past the decimal is going to be exactly 2, regardless of if it only has one decimal place, it's going to add a 0. If it has 3, it's just going to round it appropriately. Okay, so I think I think this is ready. Okay, so let's give it a try. Let's refresh it. Let's see if I have any errors. If we have syntax errors, this won't populate. Okay, awesome. Right off the bat. Okay, so I just pulled up I just hit F12 and pulled up the console log, and I have an uncaught syntax error, unexpected token of an asterisk. So let's go back here and see what that's about. So do I have an X somewhere? So let's see where that is. Plus. Okay, so let's chase this down here. Oh, I bet you it's right here. So let's see what this needs to be. So it needs to know what it's multiplying. So XY, we're mapping the experience by XI for every I. So this should be XI. Okay. So now let's try it again. Okay, so it looks like we have another unexpected identifier of the. So let's come back here and look at that. And it said it was at, okay, 265. Okay. Please enter a value number. Oh, there it is. All right, so let me just scroll through here and make sure I didn't make any other goofy mistakes. Okay, so that looks good. That looks good. Nothing standing out here. Okay, so now let's try it. Make sure our calculations are good. That's what I'm worried about. Okay, good. So now we're getting some data. All right, so let's close this and then let's refresh it because I know it squishes the screen over. Okay, there we go. So now let's pick a job title. Let's do facilities manager. Okay, it updates. This should say facilities manager. Okay, it does. Good. So now say we have an employee coming in at 9 years experience. We did an analysis. We're like, yep, relevant to the job. You got 9 years experience. Let's figure out how much money it is. How much money would be appropriate to pay based on our salary structure. Now you could easily, I mean, I know these employees would probably, and the candidate would say, well, I should be up here. Yes, that's an anomaly, but we're going off of this best line here. That should be handled, of course. And of course, handling this would change this line of best fit. But what we should get is somewhere around 99 to 100,000. So let's come down here and put in 9 years and then hit calculate. And nothing. Okay, so let's go see what that's about. Hit our F12. Okay, uncaught type error. Okay, so reading value project salary at 268. Okay, so let's go over here and look and see what this is about. Okay, so it can't read an error, so maybe we can just console log it and figure out what's populate up. That's why that had an extra A. It's a mistype. Okay, good. So now we'll try this again here. We're getting it fine-tuned because it made it down here to this part. So now it's just populating it. Let's make sure that this piece here is all good. Okay. So let's run this again. Anytime that you need to debug something in JavaScript or your HTML, just console log the snot out of every single line if you have to. Figure out what is happening and where. Makes life a lot easier because typically it's usually a typo or something. Facilities manager. Okay, so that's there. So we now need to come in here and put 9 and calculate. There it is, 9,915. So we're here, 9,915. So that's about right. So now let's give it another one. One thing that we're going to have to do, I'm not going to have y'all watch me do this, but we need to clear this every time we hit, every time the title changes, we need to clear this because this is going to stay. But let's go ahead and do 20 and see how that goes. 110. So 20 would be up here, which would make sense. So good. So now we have a functional method, and I'm going to caution this because it's only going to work if you build your compensation philosophy and practice around it and use it consistently and are able to defend, well, this is the reason why we use that. I typically like using this because once you get this set to where your R squared has a great correlation of salary and experience and it's at a positive level, then this can help you in defensibility as well as maintaining your entire structure. So I hope this was helpful and informative. I hope it answered the question. And if you do like what we're doing, please hit that subscribe button. If you have another question or would like to see something else done, please send us an email. Our email is in the description box. And until next time, please take care.